Welcome back. We left off with Dan's vision of sevens. Compared to the previous vision, this one seems to almost invite Dan to put it to calendar. We've already seen that Jeremiah's prediction that the exile would last for 70 years still held some ambiguity as Daniel reflected on the text. 70 years from when? From which displacement? Well, my take is that the predictions are not meant to mark calendar. Rather, they're meant to challenge the believer to confident belief, to righteous living, to be on mission. I take my cue from the other testament when conscientious believers wanted to get out their calendars. One example is in Acts chapter 1. Remember? Do you remember the dissatisfaction the disciples, especially Peter, had with the fact that Jesus was headed for the cross when they wanted a kingdom? And so, with the cross and resurrection behind them, what's the first question they ask the risen Lord? Verse 6. Lord, is it at this time that you're restoring the kingdom to Israel? And what's Jesus' response? It's not for you to know the times or the epochs which the Father has fixed by his own authority. But you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit's come upon you. So hold this thought. Back to the date line attached to the setting of this vision, it's in the context of Cyrus' decree to let the captives return home, along with the material goods that Nebuchadnezzar had looted from their respective temples. This decree is cited at the end of Chronicles and again at the beginning of Ezra. Here's a Persian vision of the decree. It's about the size of a football. It reads in part, Then he, Marduk, pronounced the name Cyrus, king of Anshan, and declared him, that is, pronounced his name, to become ruler of all the world. Marduk ordered him to march against his city, Babylon. He made him to set out on the road to Babylon, going at his side like a real friend. His widespread troops, their number like that of the water of a river, couldn't be established, strolled along, their weapons packed away. Without any battle, he made him enter his town Babylon, sparing Babylon any calamity. And he delivered into his, that is, Cyrus's hands, Nabonidus, the king who did not worship him, that is, Marduk. I returned these cities to the other side of the Tigris, the sanctuaries of which have been in ruins for a long time, the images which used to live therein, and established for them permanent sanctuaries. I also gathered all their former inhabitants and returned them to their habitations. So, is this the decree? Could be. But Ezra records in Ezra chapter 5 that 20 years later, in the face of some pretty intense resistance from the locals who questioned the validity of their building permit, they requested a reissue from Darius. And then Ezra chapter 7 verses 11 through 16 reports yet again a decree is issued, this time by Artaxerxes. And then Nehemiah comes to Jerusalem in 445 to provide security for the people of Judah by finishing the city wall and installing the gates. And in Nehemiah chapter 2 verses 1 through 8, there's the report that he brings with him another decree from Artaxerxes. Well, if the sevens in Daniel's vision represents years, then 69 times 7, figure it out, is 483 lunar years. That's their system of reckoning. So 483 times 360, 173,880 days. Got to divide that by 365 and a quarter, our system. And that gives us 476 years. So let's see here. If I try that on this last decree of Artaxerxes to Nehemiah in 445, 445 plus 476 is 31. Now, remember, I'm dealing BC, so I have to subtract. Excuse me, when I'm subtracting, I have to add, don't I? And when I add, I have to subtract. Anyway, 31, which is approximately when Messiah, the Prince, namely Jesus, was cut off. Well, you can scan the handout where I line up the points of contact between the various visions that we've looked at. And as we wrap up chapters 10 through 12, the issue, according to 10:10 through 14, is still what's going to happen to Daniel's people? And remember, this issue has at its core a theological question about the validity of the promise covenant. That's why clarifying and emphasizing the answer is such a big deal in exile. This section develops the answer in two phases, the near future and the distant future. So, follow me in the text. Chapter 11, verse 2. In the near future, the last of the four Persian kings will attack Greece. In 11:3 through 4, ultimately, a mighty Greek king defeats Persia and establishes a great kingdom. In time, this Hellenic empire will be divided up into 4 kingdoms. Look at verses 5 through 20. The kings of 2 of those kingdoms will battle over what they think is their appropriate territory. So you've got the Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria battling over an extended period. Verse 21 to 35, we've got this severe persecution by a despotic Seleucid king. But then, the distant future, picking up with verse 36 through 45, a king who will arise, who speaks monstrous things against the God of gods, and a great conflagration will ensue. I only wish we had more time for Daniel, but I urge you to keep digging here over the months and years ahead. I mean, there's some rich stuff. Think about it. We'll see you in a bit.